Hi everyone, welcome to our data science, machine learning and AI course, your first step towards mastering the skills to become an artificial intelligence AI expert. Our current module is all about Python fundamentals. Check out the full playlist in the description for everything we have covered so far and hit subscribe to stay updated with new lessons and future modules. Today we are going to learn about list comprehension in Python. List comprehension is a very concise way to create lists by using an expression and to use values through an iterator using a for loop, and then also adding some filters using if conditions. The syntax of the list comprehension is quite simple. We create a variable for the list and then we create it, write it inside square brackets to initialize this list, and inside that square bracket we actually specify our expression, and then we also specify the iteration on any iterable like a list or range of numbers or any other array, and then we have some condition. So let's take an example that we want to write a code without list comprehension first. And what we want to do as a code for without list comprehension is that let's iterate on range of numbers up to 5 and create their squares and add them to a list. So we write the example like squares equal empty list. Now this is where we have actually defined an empty list. Now we say for x in range 5, we will just use it up to 5 numbers from 0 to 4, and then we actually say okay, we want to append the square. So in Python these double asterisk means exponent operator, and then we want to actually take the square of x and append it inside the squares list. And finally what we want to do, we want to print squares. This will print the squares. So we have 0, square of 0 is 0, square of 1 is 1, 4, 9 and 16. Now this is one way with which we have to use almost 3 lines of code to create the squares of some numbers and append them to the list. Now if we want to do the same thing using list comprehension, what we will do, we will say squares equal, and then we will actually have to first, I'm starting it from the end to have you understand what is happening. So first let's do the for loop for x in range 5. Now see, we have this squares defined as a variable, then we have equal sign, then we have this square bracket, and following this syntax we need first an expression, then for loop, and we can then have also if else condition as well if we want. Now over here right now we don't have any if condition, so we will just write x square for x in range 5, calculate x square and add it into the list. And now if we print this squares, it will be same as the previous one but with just one line of code. That is actually the usefulness of list comprehension, that you will have less lines of code and it makes the code more readable. Now let's add some example with if else statement. So let's come back to this one again and add a if else statement here as well. For example, we want to check if the square of x is even or not. So what I can just do is that if I calculate the square of x and I use a modulo operator, so we have actually covered these exponent operators, modulo operators, which are kind of arithmetic operators in our previous videos in the playlist. Do watch them to learn more about these operators. Coming back to this, so if we say that the modulo with 2, so if we take a square of x and the remainder of it after dividing it with 2 is equals to 0, then it is an even number, and then we want to append it to this squares list, otherwise we don't want to append it. Now if we run it, this thing has changed. Now we can see that only the even squares are actually present in the list. If we want to do the similar thing with this list comprehension, we will at the end, remember, if you have one if statement only without else, then you will write it at the end like this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to repeat that same thing here with modulo operator equal equal. 0. So this is checking if the square of x is an even number or not, because if the division of this square value by 2 results in a remainder of 0 equals to 0, that is what we are checking with equality as a comparison operator, then it is an even number and then the value should be added. Now let's run this one. See, it has the same result. Now if you want to add a different value when the result is not an even number, as an else condition, how can you do that? Let's go back to this one first, how we will do it here. Else, so if it is not a square, and what you want to do, maybe you want to append a placeholder value or some other random value, so I will say we just want to append -1, let's say. So if it is an even number, we add the square of the value, otherwise we just add -1, or we can add 0 as well. Let's say 0 we are adding, and let's print it now. Sorry, there is an error. Yeah, I forgot to add an append statement, my bad. Now let's run it. Now you can see some places where the values were odd for the square, it has appended 0. Now, if we want to do the same thing in the list comprehension, as I mentioned earlier, if you only have if statement without any else, then you will write the if statement at the end. But if you have an else statement as well, then you will actually bring this if statement before the for loop, and then you will write else 0. So what it will do now, that the same thing that you were doing here, that if it was an even number, you were appending the square value, else you were appending the 0. If you write it in this way, then x square will be added to the list if the square value is an even number, or else it will be 0. So let's execute this one, and now you see we have the same output. So now you can understand the value of list comprehension, that how important it is, that you have written like how many lines of code, 6 lines of code to do something, and now you can just do it in 1 line of code. And in most cases, in most of the codes on the GitHub repositories, you will normally see a list comprehension is commonly used. So it's a very good concept to practice as well. So that was it for today. In the next video, we will learn about lambda functions. Lambda functions are also very nice thing, very important thing to define a function in 1 line. Do watch the next video. I'll see you in the next video.